What if I told you that we could solve all the world's problems? Think I'm a little crazy? Well, maybe. New question. Would you believe me if I said that millions of people across the world are already working together to do that? Not yet? Stay tuned. Welcome to Let's Talk Impact, a podcast I created to help incredible innovators share how they are reimagining the world as we know it. So, let's talk impact. Welcome to the very first episode of Let's Talk Impact. I am so excited about today's guest. I'm a huge fan of Matt D'Avella, who is a talented filmmaker, YouTuber, and podcaster. He has directed his own Netflix documentary, Minimalism, and recently launched his own education program called Slow Growth Academy. And we are in for some learning today. I'm so excited to have you, Matt. How are you doing today?
I am doing so good, and I'm so excited and also nervous about being the first guest. I feel like there's just so much pressure to be in the first one.
Not at all. Not at all. Just a ton of excitement. Yes,
absolutely.
I'm
so excited.
All right. So to kick things off, do you think you could share with everyone listening a little bit about you, what you do, and what you're all about?
Yeah. So I think, out of all the things that I'm interested in, I think my one core passion that brings all of those things together is filmmaking. So it has been the one thing that I've been really drawn to ever since I was young, ever since I was really in middle school and high school. I've just been enamored with cameras and telling stories through film. And so that makes its way through many different channels. So I have a YouTube channel. I have a Netflix documentary working on the second one. And I make videos in the form of course content, as you mentioned in the intro. And so there's so many different ways in which I'm able to kind of talk about my interests through film. But that's my core passion.
So awesome to hear. And we're going to talk about a lot of that in the future here in the next couple of minutes. But just taking a step back, you've done so much. So I was wondering if you could share with everyone the top 5 highlights of your life that you think truly represent where that progression came from when you started your story as a student to where you are today. So if you had to pull out 5 things, what would they be?
That's a really hard question,
right?
Because it's so specific, but I'll do my best, and I'll kind of just talk about my journey, because I think a lot of people have this misconception that success happens overnight. And in my experience of those closest to me and those that I know who have really made giant leaps in their careers, it takes a long time. And so for me, oh man, my early days starting out as a filmmaker, it really in college, I think, is when I started to come into my own and figure out the path that I wanted to go down, and realized that I could actually make a career in film. And that really happened through one, getting paid to make a video for the very first time. So I got paid $100 to follow around a clothing company to do a behind the scenes about how they were building this company. There was no production plan. There was no idea about how this was going to come together, and it didn't come together in the end, but I still got paid $100 for that one video or that one day of shoot filming. And so that was really the moment where it's okay, this is possible. And then, hey, that's one. So maybe I will be able to come up with 5.
There we go.
Right. And then, as I started to progress as a filmmaker, I started to get more projects, more clients, and I started to see that snowball of making a few connections and then just really nailing it and just doing my absolute best to make those clients happy. And early clients were bar mitzvahs, weddings, local television commercials. It wasn't glamorous at all, but they were projects that I put myself into. Even though somebody might be I'm not going to try. It's just a wedding. Who cares about that? I was I'm really going to try, and I'm going to make the best possible wedding video I can. And I brought that into everything I had. And then, so I graduated college with $97,000 in student debt. I did the smartest thing I could think of at the time, which was to buy a brand new car. And then now I'm just buried in about $120,000 in debt, trying to figure out what I want to do and how I wanted to actually build this career and get out of debt. And that's when I stumbled across this thing called minimalism. And so it was a lifestyle that people were talking about and blogging about, and people had said that it helped them to find clarity and find a purpose, and also to reshift their definition of what success was. And so that's where I started to realize, I don't have to actually go out and attain all these things, become successful, get all the money and the house and the cars to be able to prove to anybody that I'm successful. I can
Right.
find success and happiness with what I have right now. And so that was a turning point for me. And then after, that completely changed the trajectory of my life and where I was heading. But it also reaffirmed my passion of filmmaking. And I knew that this was definitely what I wanted to spend my time on. And so I continued to try to pay off my debt, to continue to make as many videos and work with as many clients as would be willing to pay me to make videos. And so I paid off about half of those student loans over a few years, and building my own business and freelancing through doing all these other videos that I talked about. And then the big opportunity came for me to make a documentary. And it was really more so just, it wasn't really an opportunity as much as it was, I had a chat with one of those early people that inspired me to get into minimalism, Josh Milburn. And he ran a website called The Minimalists. And they're the two guys that ended up being like the core characters of this film. And so I just, had a conversation with him. He said, hey, we want to make a documentary about our tour. And I was like, oh, I want to make a documentary about minimalism. And then we just brought those ideas together. And then I hit the road with them. And that was really like my first original film, my first piece of original content that I ever created.
Right.
And so that was a huge moment. And then after that, we finished up the film. Like it was just crazy. Obviously this will go on. This is a much longer story than it needs to be, but it was like 3 years of making that film.
Wow.
and kind of busting our butt to make it happen, investing $10,000 of my own money.
Wow.
And we ended up getting to the point where we finished the film, and it was just, we did it because we were proud of it and because it was a message we believed in.
Yeah.
And then we ended up going to the phase of, okay, now what? Now, how do we pitch this thing? How do we sell it? And then eventually through a couple back channels and finding the right people to connect us, it made its way to Netflix and iTunes, and it trended, and it got to number one on iTunes and for documentaries. And so that was a huge moment for me, and a moment for me to step back and be like, oh, this is like, I can do this. Like I can actually make films that I care about and make a living through it. And so that's when I really transitioned to making my next big leap, which was doing YouTube. And so it was like each of these, which is kind of my full-time gig now, making YouTube videos, although I still do docs and other work. It was that like always stepping into the territory where I didn't feel like I was ready, didn't feel like I was actually going to be able to make it. There was no guarantee of success. And I was like, why not? Like, I might as well try it, because I'll regret it if I didn't actually make that jump.
Yeah, that's incredible. Again, it really highlights what you said at the beginning there, that success doesn't happen overnight, and things took time to fall into place, but it really did work out great in the end, right? And that's So for everyone listening, could you please give an introduction to the Slow Growth Academy? Because it just came out recently, right? So what does it offer?
Yeah, so Slow Growth Academy it's a course platform for my courses. So at this point, the whole idea is less but better. And so it's not going to have hundreds of courses. It's likely in the next few years going to have maybe a dozen courses, and they're all going to focus on the areas that I've become an expert in. So from self-development, productivity habits, to creativity, building a business, filmmaking, storytelling, writing, all those things that I've really dedicated a majority of my time and energy into over the past decade, or what I'm going to be teaching. I think the name was thought through. It was thought through really intentionally, and a lot of people might see that as a bad thing. Like, slow growth seems contrary to what most people would want.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's what I've noticed through my own growth over the years, is that you don't always see growth. It certainly doesn't happen overnight. And so it takes months of work. I think the one area where I saw it most was in building my YouTube channel, and where I put, I had 8 years, 10 years of filmmaking leading up to that moment. And then I had a year and a half of making YouTube videos every week, putting out new videos and podcasts. And it really didn't feel like I was growing. It didn't feel like I was gaining momentum, that my audience didn't grow significantly during that time. There was no sign that I would be able to make money from it, but I didn't realize it, but I actually was growing during that time. I was learning about storytelling, how to interview people, I was experimenting with different ways of learning how to build an audience and a platform online. And so when I finally did break through that wall, I realized that I was growing all along. And I think that was the whole idea behind slow growth, is that don't get frustrated and judge yourself based upon the moments and based upon the days. Judge yourself over the course of months and years. And that's how you can really truly see if you've grown or not. It's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, when you put it in there, that was one of my follow-up questions. So I'm really glad you answered that. That actually really makes sense why the name would be that. And I think intentionality behind it is actually a really good thing too. So
Thanks.
I was watching one of your videos and I was just scrolling through the comments mindlessly, and then someone commented, and I want to read the comment here. He said, "Matt is a rare gem that's hard to come across these days. He doesn't have a long, annoying intro. He doesn't shove all these ads into your face. He doesn't force you to subscribe. He doesn't care about reaching 10 minutes. Most of all, he is honest and genuinely cares about helping other people." So I realized, and when you launched Slow Growth Academy, you also, both in your YouTube and in your social media, you kind of emphasize this idea of like no pressure. If you can't afford it, or if this is not something for you, like no pressure there, which I thought was really, really different than what a lot of content creators out there do. Like, I think a lot of emphasis is around buy this merch or get this product because we're endorsing it. So that's a very mindful thing to do in this space. So I'm curious, why take that extra step, and where did that idea / mentality come from?
I think it started with, so much of this comes back to first principles and having principles and having values and not being driven by money and money alone. And, when you're making films and you're making content online, and it takes a lot of time and energy. And so you can't do it for free, and you do have to figure out ways to monetize. But I always wanted to do it in a way that aligned with my values and my beliefs. And so, coming back to minimalism and the hyper consumption that really inspired minimalism to come through and for people to follow that movement, because we've been sold this idea that if you buy these products, if you buy these things, then you'll finally be happy. And I don't want anybody to ever think that like you need one of my courses or you need to watch one of my videos in order to find happiness, because that's not true. I was able to get by without my courses. So like just honesty and integrity in what you're creating, trying to create a product, if you are creating a product, to do it in a way where you're giving so much more value than you're getting. So somebody is getting more from watching a course and taking a course than I am from making money from it. And so I think that's been core to everything I've done and continue to do, is not just look out for my best interests, but look out for the interests of viewers and people who watch my videos. And like, truly, like, and like, this is not one of those things where it's like reverse psychology. Like I hopefully get through to people, and I stop people from buying it if they don't have the money. Like if somebody puts anything that I make on a credit card, that would be really upsetting to me. And because like I would rather somebody, take the financial steps they need to get out of debt and to become debt free than to buy one of my courses, because my courses are always going to be there, and there's always an opportunity to get it later. Or there's tons of free content online, like buy a book for $10. It may be a little bit more work than taking a course. But there's always alternative options out there.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a nice breeze of fresh air right there of new insight.
Thank you.
So I wanted to talk more about your documentary Minimalism that we touched on a little bit at the beginning. First, could you give everyone listening just a quick summary of what it's about?
Yeah, so we kind of touched on a lot of the themes already, but the documentary Minimalism really follows this growing movement of people who have decided to really take a stand against the status quo and consumerism. And so it's not a massive movement, but especially compared to the status quo and to how people are consuming right now through one-click purchases, Black Friday sales, like those numbers keep increasing year after year. But I stumbled across these people who called themselves minimalists, who decided to live a more intentional life. So instead of going on that treadmill of trying to buy more things to find more happiness, only to find themselves let down, they decided to intentionally cut back. Usually it starts with people decluttering their lives,
Sure.
going through the things that they own in their life and realizing I don't use this, I don't get value from it, it doesn't bring me any joy. It's not always about utility. There is beauty that is essential and necessary. And so artwork might be essential to you. It may be something that brings joy to your life that you want to hold on to it. But it's about being really thoughtful about those things that you do bring into your life. So it starts with that decluttering. And then once you get through the stuff, again, you continue to be really mindful about these messages now that we receive through social media and through advertising, to not overconsume and to not bite off more than we can chew, and to not try to find happiness in external measures and trying to find happiness internally. And so that's kind of the first step into minimalism. But then it goes much further than just the stuff. Like if all you're focused on is the stuff, then you're kind of missing the point, because it's really all about the relationships that you build, where you're spending your time and energy, how are you focusing on your health and your well-being, and are you giving back and contributing? And so I think those are the things that you look to find fulfillment in once you start looking past the stuff. And so that's really what minimalism was about. And the documentary follows a bunch of people who call themselves minimalists.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the people. So what was it like first directing, and then second, like portraying those stories? Because you kind of, as a director, has the responsibility of like showing those stories authentically and like giving a real, honest example of what their lives are like. So what was that like for you?
Yeah, that's always a challenge. I mean, it wasn't my first time directing a video, it was my first time directing a film, but not my first time directing a video. And so I had gotten my reps in making hundreds of other videos, and those wedding videos that I edited earlier in my career, it helped out. And it definitely gave me at least the reps that I needed to have an eye for filmmaking and storytelling. And so, the one piece of advice that I got very early on from another filmmaker is that if your story doesn't change along the way, then you're not listening. And so, like, going in with an idea of what the story in the film is going to look like, but then being willing to adapt and change as you start to get more info. And so that's exactly what happens when you go out and you do 30 interviews and you try to tie that into a cohesive story. And you are taking like hundreds of hours of footage and then cutting it down to represent the truth and what I saw when I went on tour and when I interviewed these guys. And so that's what you're trying to do as a director and as a filmmaker, is just to be as honest as possible, and also to make a really interesting, compelling film that grips people and holds their attention. And so I think that's a challenge every time you set out to make a film, is like making something that's good and that's worth watching. And so that was, but it's like you're kind of, it's easy to talk big picture, but then it's also, I mean, I filmed and edited the whole thing. There was no crew. It was just me. And so you're in the weeds, like you're in the dirt working day after day on this thing. And sometimes it's hard to get the big picture, but it does happen through like that daily process of showing up each day and learning more and more about the story you're trying to tell.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, it was great, and everyone listening needs to go watch it if you haven't already on Netflix. It's called Minimalism, and I'll make sure to link that actually in the show notes below. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today and being our first guest. I'm so excited that you were able to do this and we got connected. Where could everyone find you on social media? What's your handles?
Yeah, so it's Matt D'Avella across everything, MattDavella. That's like Twitter, Instagram. YouTube is where most people watch my videos, so that might be a good first place to check out.
All right, and I'll make sure to stick those all in the show notes below, but super excited again. So thankful to have you on. Thank you for joining, and excited to keep the conversation going.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This was fun.
Thanks for listening to Let's Talk Impact. Information about this week's guest can be found in the show notes below. Make sure you connect with them and me. If you have an idea or you just want to talk about impact some more, connect with me at Matine Khalighi on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. If you like what you're hearing, please leave a review below. And don't forget to follow Let's Talk Impact on all social media platforms. Just search at Let's Talk Impact Pod. See you next time.